Welcome back to Let's Talk Sports. I'm CJ Tully. We have finally reached the College Football National Championship. It's Miami. It's Indiana. Let's talk about it. Let's start off by talking about this Miami team, that team that nobody expected to make the college football playoffs after having two bad losses to SMU and to Louisville. That SMU loss coming in overtime, but Carson Beck wasn't looking like he was going to be able to get this team over that hump. They beat Notre Dame to start the season, and that win ended up paying dividends, as that was the win that got them into the playoffs over Notre Dame, and then they had to go up on a tough task against Texas A&M. Now, in that matchup, the win was definitely playing a factor, but I want to break down just what Miami has done in the postseason and just how they got to this point. Let's start with this defense. This defense showed up in that Texas A&M game where they had 7 sacks and 2 interceptions. This was against a great, high-powered Texas A&M offense, a team that I thought had enough power and enough grit to get to the National Football Championship, and they held them to 3 points. That is something to say about this Miami defense, and that continued into the game against Ohio State. After beating that high-powered offense by Texas A&M, they had to go against one of the powerhouses of college football in Ohio State, and they ended up beating them with 5 sacks and 2 more interceptions. Julian Sain looked lost in that first half, and that was all attributed to this Miami defense and just how quickly they were able to get after the quarterback. Now, this defense did take a bit of a back seat the past game against Ole Miss, allowing 27 points, only having 1 sack, and they were not able to turn over the ball through interceptions in that game. But again, this Miami defense, they're going to need them in this game against Indiana. They're going to have to win at the lines, and if they can revert back to that defense that they had against A&M and that they had against Ohio State, this Miami defense is going to be the difference maker in the national championship. Something else we want to look at here with this Miami team is Carson Beck. He didn't show up the biggest throughout the first 2 games of the playoffs against A&M and against Ohio State. He was more so a game manager in those games, having just about 100 to 130 yards in each of those, having some touchdowns, not turning the ball over, which was the most important thing with Carson Beck. Came into the postseason with about 10 interceptions on the season, but he really was able to limit that, be the game manager, and let the defense get after the quarterback. Now, in a game against Ole Miss where the defense wasn't necessarily being the difference maker, it was Carson Beck to finally step up and make his time count. He had 268 yards in that game, 2 touchdowns through the air. He did throw an interception, but that did not come back to bite them as many would have thought it would. And he had a rushing touchdown on the final drive of the game for Miami, where he didn't see any options, took it upon himself to go and rush into the end zone, and that finally put Carson Beck in the realm of difference maker, not just game manager. He saw a game where he had to go out there and make something happen, and he did that. And I think this is something that Carson Beck and this Miami offense can start to rely on now that they've seen it happen. Somebody else that has been a huge difference maker for this Miami team, while Carson Beck wasn't necessarily making the difference, was Mark Fletcher. He showed up huge in that Texas A&M game where the ball was just being carried by everything with the wind and on all the factors that played into this game, so they had to rely on the run game. Mark Fletcher Jr. goes for 172 yards in that game against Texas A&M. He then showed up again against Ohio State with 90 yards and 133 yards on 22 carries against Ole Miss. This Miami offense can continue to rely on that rushing attack. That takes a lot off Carson Beck. It takes a lot off this defense because then it comes down to the clock management. And this Miami offense was on the field for 41 minutes against Ole Miss, and that is something, if they're able to keep Fernando Mendoza and this offense off the field, will play huge for Miami. The final thing on Miami is just the grit that they've been able to have and the young talent that has shown up. Malachi Toney has been a huge part of that. He's been lethal out of the backfield. You can find him on the side. He makes incredible catches, and he is just being a difference maker. He had a touchdown in the Texas A&M game and in the Ole Miss game, but even if he's not necessarily giving you all of that production through the end zone, he is just taking eyes off Carson Beck. He's taking eyes off players like Keelan Marion, who's also had over 100 yards last game against Ole Miss. So he's allowing other players to get open, and he's allowing this Miami offense to flourish in many ways. So Malachi Toney is somebody else to keep an eye on and somebody else that can make a true difference in this game against Indiana. So how can this Miami team win? Well, it's pretty simple, but it's not necessarily easy. They're going to have to play perfect on their end. No turnovers. Time management is going to be key, but you also need to force a turnover, which is unheard of against this Indiana team. You're going to have to get those extra possessions. You're going to have to apply the pressure. You're going to need to go back to those 7-sack games, those 5-sack games that you had early in the postseason, and that is the way that you can get around Indiana. Now let's talk about this Indiana team, because there is so much to dissect with how this team has gone from nothing to something this season. They did have a playoff run last year. They got bounced by Notre Dame, but they've been a completely different team this season. They've been undefeated. They won the Big Ten championship, knocking off Ohio State, everybody's powerhouse, And then you see what they were able to do in crucial games on the road. The way Fernando Mendoza was able to lead this team in crucial drives against Oregon, Iowa, and Penn State. And that Penn State game I had tweeted out immediately was the decision maker for me that made him the Heisman. Going to Omar Cooper Jr. in the back of the end zone. He was backed by his own 2-yard line to start that drive, and he was able to make the differences, make the plays to get them down the field. Then they come into the college football playoffs as the 2 seed. They have the bye week, and a lot of teams come out flat after the bye week. It seems like they forget how to play football in that bye week. But here comes Indiana. They roll Alabama, who had come off an emotional win over Oklahoma. They win 38-3. That is unheard of when you look at some of these teams coming off bye weeks. Picking up wins is one thing, but the way that you're able to demolish, act like you've never lost your stride, that was huge for Indiana. Mendoza, I obviously said that he has been the Heisman, but he has been perfect in the playoffs. He's not yet turned the ball over. He was 14 for 16 in that game against Alabama. He's in 17 for 20 against Oregon. Yes, his yards aren't necessarily flashy. He throws for 192 and 177 in their respective games. He throws for 3 touchdowns against Alabama and 5 against Oregon. And he just doesn't miss. I said those completion percentages and just how much he's able to make of every single throw. It is so impressive, and it's the kind of plays that you expect to see on a Sunday. He's making them on Saturdays, and hopefully we'll be seeing him make those on Mondays as well. But Fernando Mendoza, he has been a key piece of all this. Again, he's not making the mistakes. He's not getting sacked necessarily. He's finding ways to use his legs, his arm, and he's making the difference for Indiana. Something else that I think people are underestimating with this Indiana team is the rush game. You look so much at Fernando Mendoza that you don't necessarily think about the running backs and Kalen Black and Roman Hemby, but this Indiana team has had 90 carries on their offense for the rushing attack and to only 30 passing attempts this postseason. So they've been able to utilize this rushing attack. Yes, all eyes are on Fernando Mendoza, but when you're able to utilize the rushing attack like Indiana has been, that's very impressive. You looked at this game against Alabama, 89 yards for Hemby, 99 yards for Kalen Black. They each had a touchdown in that game. And then in their most recent game against Oregon, you saw Kalen Black go for 63 yards and 2 touchdowns. So do not underestimate this rushing attack. These weapons on the outside, they're lethal as well. You have Elijah Surratt. He has 3 touchdowns in the playoffs, 2 of those coming last week with 75 yards against Oregon. Omar Cooper Jr., he has himself 2 touchdowns as well. And Charlie Becker, I made a video not too long ago talking about Charlie Becker. He has been that guy, that unsung hero, the guy that, comes out of the bullpen in the playoffs that you're not necessarily getting your scouting report on. That has been Charlie Becker. In that Big Ten championship game, he goes for over 100 yards, and he has been a production piece for this Indiana offense all postseason long. He is somebody to keep an eye on. He has 2 touchdowns as well in the postseason, but this is going to be a great matchup. It's going to be defense on defense, very high-powered. Who wins at the lines? That's going to be the difference maker. It's going to be very hard to bet against Indiana. They've played such perfect football, but I think the grittiness that we have seen with this Miami team is going to be something that plays a big part in all of this. Seeing Carson Beck finally become a decision maker more than just a game manager, I think is going to play big. I'm going to go with the upset and take Miami in this one. I think it's going to be tight, but I think that Miami's defense is going to be able to make the turnovers, get to the quarterback more so than Indiana will be able to, and give me Miami to win this one 27-21. It's going to be tight, but I do think the defenses will make the difference. Give me Miami. Well, let me know what you guys think. Who wins the national championship? If you're able to guess the score correctly, I will be doing a giveaway for some Let's Talk Sports merch, so you can check that out as well. Follow me on all social media and check out my website at letstalksports.com. You can find everything linked there. Thank you to everybody for tuning in this college football season. There's going to be much bigger things coming next year, so stay tuned for that. And again, this is Let's Talk Sports. National championship is on the horizon.